Thank you so much, Mr. Sawyerr. We welcome you to this interview. Thank you for accepting our invitation. We know you're an incredibly busy person, so we really appreciate you taking this time to meet with us today. We'll go straight into the interview now. If it's okay by you, sir?
Fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'd like to first start with just asking, who's Mr. Akintunde Sawyerr, please?
I'm a patriotic Nigerian in the first instance, who loves his country, genuinely loves this country. I'm a family man. I have a family of Nigerian children. I have been in the corporate world before joining government. This is my first government position. But before now, I've worked in corporate world for large corporations from the UK across Germany, Denmark, Switzerland, and also the Middle East. So I've worked and lived in the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. So I have a very diverse background in healthcare education, logistics and supply chain, medical technology, agriculture, and now the one that encompasses all of those things, education. I had most of my education in the UK. Went to boarding school in the UK at the age of 12. Had all my education in the UK all the way through to my university. Went to the University of London. And here I am today, back in my own country, trying to contribute my quota as a recognition of what Nigeria has done for me, which is not insignificant, given that all my education was paid for by my parents' earnings from Nigeria. So it's payback time, guys. Payback time for me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're glad you came back. We're glad you came back to your country to serve your country, and you're serving it very well today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So I wanted to ask, the student loan program, is it modeled on a particular program that you've seen abroad? Is there a particular program in whether the UK or the US that you modeled the NELFUND program on?
Well, yes and no. I think this particular student loan program is probably very similar to the one that they have in the UK. I think that's probably the closest scheme that this one resembles. However, this also seeks to recognize the fact that there are many people who simply cannot afford to pay for their own education, or whose parents can't afford it, and therefore there's a high number of people who drop out before they can get to the tertiary stage because they simply can't afford it. This is unique in the sense that the loans or the law behind this allows the loans to be given on an interest-free basis. On top of that, it also does not compel the borrower to have to pay back the loan unless they're self-employed. The obligation for repayment of the loan is on the employer, who only deducts 10% of the loanee's wages or salary to pay back to the fund. In other words, the loanee is not criminalized at any stage for not being able to pay back, and also they don't have to pay back if they don't have a job. That is the implication of saying the employer needs to pay it back. If you don't have an employer, you can't pay it back. The other thing I should mention is that there is a mandatory National Youth Service scheme that every Nigerian must undertake sometime after they graduate. This scheme puts no reporting obligation for payback on the loanee until 2 years after completion of the NYSC, which makes it even longer in terms of giving them an opportunity to find a job before they even have to think about asking their employer to pay back on their behalf.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. To my next question, sir. Technology, everybody knows that technology is the most efficient way to go about things. But we also know that at times the technology sort of can disappoint. Do you have any regrets at all for making this whole process totally online?
Absolutely none. And in fact, there's no way that we would have been able to reach as many people in terms of the applications made if we had done this process as a manual process. We have had over 335,000 applicants. And quite apart from anything else, if we set up offices to receive applications from 335,000 people, it would be a logistics nightmare, not just for us, but for them. Because people would have had to travel to a location to go and complete a form, perhaps conduct an interview. So we have no regrets because it means that we've achieved a very high penetration rate in a relatively short space of time. The reason we've been able to do this is because a lot of other people have been doing a lot of other good work in Nigeria to help us be able to leverage technology. So, for example, the National Identity Management, NIMSI, have been collecting national identity numbers for people for years. They've been doing that along with biometrics. The central bank, with the BVN, the bank verification number system, has been able to tie people to specific bank accounts. The organization JAMB has been effectively putting in place a very robust system where people can apply to attend bona fide universities if they've got a JAMB number, sat a JAMB exam in many cases. So we've had the opportunity to leverage technology. And of course, when people register and enter an institution, they're usually given an admission number and they end up with a matriculation number. So we've got a number of data points, databases that we can key into that makes it easier. We have no regrets to your question about using technology. It's made things happen much more quickly, despite some of the challenges that people sometimes might face with technology.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I really appreciate the fact that you've also mentioned the fact that a lot of people, when they were asking for BVN, but then later they're asking for NIN, people are thinking, what's this all about? This is really stressful and so on. But now they actually realize that it has huge benefits because other schemes, agencies, whatever, actually able to sort of leverage on that. So I'm glad you touched that because that's actually a very important point. Thank you very much for that. I also
can't hear you very well. I have to tell you, I can't hear you very well at all.
Oh,
so you might need to speak.
Really?
Yeah. Now I can hear you. Yeah.
You can hear me. Okay. So I was just saying that I appreciate the fact that you mentioned the benefits of BVN, NIN, and all that, because the truth is that when people have been asked to fill all those things in, it seems very stressful. And people wondering why we do
We've had an internet freeze. Can you?
Yeah, I think his connection is frozen.
Yes. Okay. So it's from his end.
Yeah, it's from his end. Okay, so while we wait for him to come back, are you back, Dapo?
I'm back. They took electricity here, so that's why I went for a second before I went to my data. So I'm still here.
Okay.
Yes.
All
yes,
right.
yes. So I can just let me just go straight into the next question. That's okay.
Sure.
Are we good? Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you very
I
much.
can hear you.
So the thing, okay, good. So the next thing I wanted to ask is that okay, a lot of people are really excited about the fact that the scheme is now going to be extended to vocational training and so on. I wanted to ask, how is that going to work? How's the process for that going to work? I mean, for the universities, people apply, fees are paid directly to universities and so on. When it comes to vocational training, how is that going to work?
So, first of all, let me try and describe the vision to you, the vision that we have for vocational training. We are looking to see how we might be able to lift upwards of 50 million people up one level. It's an entirely different ball game to the one we've been doing so far, where we're talking about maybe 1.5, 1.8 million people. Now we're talking about what many people describe as, at the bottom end, the masses. How do we move them off the bottom and push them up the ladder to the next level? And the people on that level, how do we push them up to the level after that? And then the level after that. There are a number of issues that we're having to grapple with. One is based around the fact that we're giving loans to people. We have to be able to track who they are, where they are, from an accountability perspective. We need to be able to say, we gave a loan to somebody, we have some way of identifying who that somebody is. If you think about it, many of the people at the lower end of the pyramid are not as documented as people who are attending universities and polytechnics and what have you. So we intend to find ways of capturing data down to an individual level so that we have a reasonable chance of being able to account for who we gave a loan to. In other words, we want to digitalize records of people, and we want to do that through engaging them through associations, clubs, cooperatives, companies, unions, communities. So any sort of node of where people can convene, we want to see how we can encourage these associations to be formed if they haven't been formed already. I'm sorry, we just had the same issue with light. I don't know if you noticed. But if they haven't been formed already, how they get captured by their association. And then it is through the association that the referral for the loan is made. That is the objective that we have. It requires us to build databases from scratch, unlike the one I just described with JAM, NIMSI, BVN, matric number. These are people who don't necessarily have even a bank account, let alone a phone number that is consistent from one month to the next. So our plan is to see how we can gather this data by using associations. Most people in this country belong to an association, a club, a union, a community, these or have a job somewhere in a factory or in a company. And that's how we want to work. We want to engage with these people by putting them into corporate entities so that we can track and trace. I think the other thing that we need to do, and we're looking at very closely, is how we certificate people. If you go to a university, you come out with a BA, a BSc, an MSc, a PhD, or whatever.
Yeah.
We don't have people coming out of technical schools or technical training in Nigeria necessarily with a standardized document that says that this is the competency level of that individual. So we've got to grapple with that as well. Otherwise, helping people get jobs becomes very difficult.
Excellent. I mean, that's something that I think we've spoken about it before too, about having some sort of standardized training.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Certificates. I think that's something we've been talking about as well. I mean, having some sort of standardized training and certificate, very much like I think they have in some of these francophone countries as well. So that's great. That's great. We also want to ask that, looking at the current economic realities, do you have any plans for increasing the monthly allowance from the 20,000 naira?
Well, no immediate plans, and I'll tell you why. We arrived at that figure having looked very closely at what we thought might be needed. The primary challenge for the average student in a public tertiary institution in Nigeria are their institutional fees. So the big elephant in the room is how much they're paying the institution for their course. The 20,000 naira upkeep, which is an optional borrowing, is one that we believe for now is sufficient to take care of the very basic needs: photocopying, telephone calls, data, which are the sort of things that support studies. We don't restrict how those funds are spent. But what I can tell you is that people who didn't know how they were going to pay their school fees in the first place are immensely grateful, not only to have that taken off the table, but to have a little bit extra. And by the way, 20,000 naira, as small as it sounds, can make a big difference in the lives of some people, and these funds are paid for the entire session, which is for 12 months. So that's 240,000 naira per individual. Some families have 2 or 3 children on the loan. We're seeing some interesting trends. For the first time, or for many of these students, they're for the very first time able to give their parents some money. I was talking to a student recently who said that he was able to give his mum 5,000, his brother 5,000, and keep 10,000 for himself. To your question, do we have plans to increase it? It's not a metric we're chasing at the moment. What we're chasing at the moment is how can we get as many people who need this loan to take it. Once we have maxed out on that, we'll then start looking to see how more comfortable, fruitful it is for individuals. And I'm sure that's one of the things we'll look at.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. Ade, would you like to take? I'd like Ade to take over from here. I think he has a few questions he'd like to ask himself. Thank you so much, sir.
All right. Thank you, Dakbo. And thank you, Mr. Akintunde Sawyerr. I mean, your responses have been very, very... Sawyerr. Pardon me, Mr. Akintunde Sawyerr. So thank you for all of the responses. And I would say that they are quite enlightening. And this is something that, we believe that everyone within the education sector would learn from, especially, at the tertiary education level, especially for those that are yet to benefit or yet to actually latch on to this program. So one of the things that we would like to know, sir, why do you think the student loan has received far fewer applications in southern Nigeria compared to northern Nigeria?
Okay.
Why do you think that's happened?
Okay. So your question says, why do I think? So what I'm
Yes.
going to offer you is my opinion. It's not based on any empirical evidence around why it's happened in this way. But my suspicion is that the northern part of Nigeria has suffered quite greatly from high levels of poverty. That has obviously led to insurgency and perhaps banditry as well. There is a sort of need by the people in that region to find all ways out of the misery that these things have caused them. And I think that they've recognized and seen, particularly at the institutional level. So the institutions themselves have recognized that this is a way out for many of the people who study in those institutions or are from the local communities. So the institutions have been very organized about helping students apply. Conversely, in the South, where there's a greater number of mineral resources, there's a greater number of families with members who are living or studying or working abroad, and therefore there's an opportunity for some remittances to come back. There's also a sense of pride in certain instances where people have this misconception that if you're borrowing money, it's not necessarily a good thing. And then mixing that whole borrowing up without really thinking carefully about what you're borrowing for. If you're borrowing for education, it's different to if you're borrowing for a car, unless you're an Uber driver, of course. But I think there's a stigma in some parts of the South attached to being a loanee. So in a nutshell, poverty levels have an effect. I think the only other thing that I want to add to that is that there are some parts of the South where there's a high level of skepticism around anything that government offers. This is based on historical experiences and relationships between government and people from certain corners of Nigeria. It goes back 60 years plus. So those are my thoughts around why we're seeing these discrepancies. It's good to share the thoughts, but what we're trying to do in a constructive way is to address that by making more noise in the South, putting together situations where there's better orientation or reorientation in the South, so that people take a different view and a different approach to what NELFUND is offering.
All right, thank you very much. So that's on the side of those that are benefiting from the loans. Now back to NELFUND. What contingency plans do you have in place, or are you putting in place to mitigate economic shocks that could impact funding availability or repayment rates in future? I know you've mentioned some of these earlier, but just to throw more light into, your mitigation plans with regards funding availability and possible repayment rates in future.
Okay, so currently we are governed by the law that ensures or enforces us to only hold funds in government instruments. Clearly, one of the ways in which we can get or recognize more income is to invest more in private sector investment portfolios. One of our mitigants is, or mitigation plans, is to get some sort of waiver from His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, to allow us to be able to invest for income. The second is that we are, by law, allowed to receive donations. We're allowed to receive gifts. We're allowed to enter into financial partnerships and relationships that bolster the general reserve funds that we have. We believe that once we're able to be active in this regard, we can actually begin to march down the road of having a more sustainable fund and a more sustainable future. We're also going to be looking very closely about how we manage repayment of the loans so that we can maximize the return that we get on investment, or on loaning out the funds, not so much investment. So these are some of the mitigants that we are looking at. We also want to set up a foundation that will allow us to look at special cases where people perhaps don't need a loan, they just need money. I'll give you an example. Somebody wants a loan, we give them a loan. Somewhere down the line, they develop a disease or they're involved in an accident. That means that they become disabled or physically challenged. That person's costs of learning, costs of transport, costs of everything goes up for somebody who has suddenly either lost their eyesight or lost use of their legs or arms. We want to have a fund that we can use to support these people if they're already on the loan without us having to lend them more money in the middle of their misfortune. So we're looking at innovative models that will allow us to do things like that. Hopefully it's not rocket science, but we're open to ideas if you have any.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sure conversations like this would lead to that, going forward. Because I'm pretty sure that, there are quite a lot of people who are interested in what NELFUND is doing. And because it's a thing of joy, because it takes us to the next question, where you look at a country like the United States of America, where students' loan accumulates interest over the years, and while they remain unpaid. So it now comes to the fact that in Nigeria, for us to embark on this interest-free loan, is this something we can sustain?
I think I would turn that question round and say to you, is our current education model sustainable from a nation-building perspective? And my answer to the question that I just asked is no. Does that mean that the answer to the question you asked is yes? I think possibly. I think that, we have to uplift the people of Nigeria so that Nigeria itself becomes more competitive, because the people of Nigeria are doing more. They're more productive. If they're more productive, they will be able to contribute more to national growth. They'll be able to contribute more to paying taxes. They'll be able to be more enlightened when they go into negotiations on behalf of the country. with other countries and come out with better outcomes for the country. You know, educating your children is not a matter of choice, I think. I think it's an absolute necessity in the world we live in today. And you will see parents on an individual level going to all lengths to sustain this. And I think we need to have that sort of desperate attitude.
Thank you for that. Thank you. That is quite apt. And I think you gave the that question really. There is no way out if we must actually improve our economy as a country and eventually even as a continent. Now, you know, we believe that in all of these that NELFUND is doing, you have your challenges too. All right. What are those things that you're challenging, or what is possibly the biggest challenge that's, you know, you are facing as NELFUND? And also, what are the key performance indicators that you probably use in measuring your impact? It's probably maybe a short time between when you started out and now, because I believe you've been doing this for only less than a year, which you've done so much. Okay, so are there any KPIs that you've been using to measure your impact, you know, with regard to how people are accessing education and also about the socioeconomic mobility, you know, of people?
So your first question was around the biggest challenge that we faced.
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge we face is probably convincing the unconvinced that this is real. It's not a scam. It's not money going into the pockets of the people who are running it. That's been a big challenge because of the trust deficit between government and the people. And I don't mean this government, I mean governments over the last 60 years. It's not uncommon. It happens all over the world. You find many countries in the world today where people just don't trust the government. So the big challenge for us has been to convince the people that the president means well. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, His Excellency, president means well. To convince the people that the funds are there and available to pay for their fees when they apply. To convince them that the system is not rigged. To convince people that it's not a trap. It's not like the American system where there's so much interest, people can never pay. So that whole communication piece and trying not to be misunderstood or misinterpreted has been very, very challenging for us. In terms of KPIs, numbers don't lie. So our focus at the moment is on the numbers. How many people can we get in front of? How many people can we present our case to? How many people believe our case? And how many people, having believed the case, go forward and make an application? Those are really our KPI. How many we're seeing, how many can we get in front of, how many can we make our case to, how many do we think believe us, and how many actually apply. And then finally, how many can we deliver the value to in terms of the fees and in terms of the upkeep. And I already shared some numbers. So those are the things we measure ourselves by today. If you ask me this question in 10 years' time, I may be talking a little bit more about repayment. I may be talking a little bit more about the skills program, which we have started. There are other KPIs. Might be talking a little bit more around how many people who took the loan are now in the tax net. How many people who took the loan have started their own businesses? How many people who took the loan are in good jobs and earning a lot of money? The repayment, by the way, is a reflection of the employability of the people, because if they're employed, then they can pay back. It's not so much about necessarily in my head about getting the money back. It's about, if we get 100% payback, then it means that 100% of the people we've given loans to are working. It's never going to be 100 for 100, but that's a KPI that we would look at. I think the final thing you mentioned out of that trio of questions was around socioeconomic, I don't know if it was benefits, you said.
Yeah, development and mobility.
Development
and mobility.
And mobility. So so I guess if we think about this on the basis of, if you uplift everybody even by one notch at a time. So we're not talking about taking somebody who's a laborer today to become a managing director tomorrow. That's a complete outlier situation. But if you take a laborer and you turn them into a carpenter, or you take somebody with a first degree or with an HND and you get a first degree, you create an upward social mobility that, if you do it at scale, lifts the entire nation up. And then you can compare the nation of yesterday to the nation of today, or the nation of today with another nation with similar demographics, socioeconomic metrics. We live in a competitive world, and we can probably see how that upward social mobility happens, as I say, from taxes being paid, improvements in infrastructure, how much lower you can drive the need for foreigners coming to work in Nigeria, how much you can support local manufacturing, because you've got people who now are delivering to a particular quality such that you can reduce the amount of imports or the import dependency of the nation. These are all factors that feed into socioeconomic well-being and mobility, I believe.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. So this next question, basically, which is second to the last, is more or less, in a way, we see it almost like an answer to some of the questions that have been asked, before getting to this point. So it's noted that good education is not cheap. Okay, in the US, colleges and colleges alumni are a significant source of funding for college education. Harvard University famously has over $50 billion in endowment funds. Do you see something like this happening in Nigeria, one day? And how do you think it can start? I mean, based on the inspiration that NELFUND is actually, bringing our way, how do you think this can actually metamorphosize into, endowment funds coming up, across the country and according to institutions?
Sure, I think it's a really good question. And let me try and build up the answer for you in a particular way. When you see institutions like Harvard or Cambridge in the UK, or University of Maastricht in the Netherlands, when you see these institutions attracting donations, funding from their alumni, it's because those people had a good experience in that institution. And they attribute, oftentimes, their success today, if you like, to the institution where they were taught, where they qualified. One of the things that this loan scheme does is that it says, we're going to give your school money on your behalf, and we're going to give all your colleagues, all the cohort, the school who applied for the loan, money on behalf of the cohort. Now, the institution, therefore, is in a position where they can invest. They can invest better in the institution. The institutional authorities can invest better in the institution. If they invest properly, if they invest properly, which is completely out of our hands. If they invest properly, the institution will get better facilities, they'll create a better learning environment, they'll attract better staff, academic and non-academic. And therefore, the assumption is that if you have that, the students who go through that institution will have a better experience, will be better equipped because of the positivity around them and the ease of learning around them. If you get that and people come out confident, well qualified, and with a piece of paper sometimes that they can be proud of. I went to this school. And people say, if you went to that school, we'll employ you because we know that that school does not mess around. If the institutions do the right thing with the money that they get given through the students' voting power to vote to go to their school and bring their loan to that school, you will find that we will begin to graduate students who say, you know what, I went to that school, I got everything I wanted to get out of that school, I'm now a successful person, I will contribute to the success of that school. So that's where the alumni mentality and success of it comes from globally. If you go to a school that you didn't enjoy the experience in, that you don't think contributed much to you, even if you give them something, you're giving it to them because you feel sorry for those who are there. But if you had a good experience there, you'll want others, if you're a good person, to have the same thing, and therefore you will contribute. But I'll just say one thing to you. Since we started, we've had a number of people who took loans in Nigeria in the 70s, who have given us back that money. Now, we ourselves, as a financial institution, will have our own cohort of people who, if we do a good job, will come back and say, you know what? I got a loan from you that took me to an institution that improved or changed my life. Therefore, I'm going to contribute. And if you remember, I said earlier, the law allows NELFUND to take donations, to receive donations, to take gifts, to receive gifts, to fundraise, if you like. And if we do a good job, particularly if we are transparent in everything we do, if we're transparent about the money we have, how we spend it, who we give it to, it'll make people more confident about giving money into the fund. So we have our own endowment opportunity, if you can call it that, going.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you for that response. I like the build-up. The build-up is actually, something that tells a story of 100 and even 1,000 years. And it tells a story of sustainability and of growth as well. Thank you so much for that. Finally, as a founding appointee of NELFUND, how can NELFUND align its goals with Nigeria's broader educational and economic development policies, such as the National Development Plan? So how will NELFUND address the potential challenges in loan recovery as well to ensure a revolving fund for future beneficiaries? So this is a two-in-one question, talking about NELFUND's role in National Developmental Plan from education perspective, and also economic development policies. And of course, picking that back to the revolving fund for future beneficiaries through loan recovery. How do you plan to do that going forward?
Okay, so the first thing I would probably want to say is that we have inherited courses and institutions of state that we can do nothing about. So if somebody approaches us today and says, I'm studying the relationship between the sun and the moon. Because we're obliged today to fund pretty much all courses in tertiary institutions, we would probably need to give a loan to that person for studying the relationship between the sun and the moon. It doesn't mean that that course is not relevant. It just means it's not relevant for Nigeria today. The things that we need to build this nation are really relatively basic, okay? So there are some courses that are no longer required, and we need to think carefully going into the future what we do with those courses. They may well be accredited, they may well be great courses for Eskimos, but they may not be good courses for Nigerians. And we do have a lot of legacy issues going on here, as any country that has been influenced very heavily by foreign powers may have. There's a large overhang. The approach, therefore, that we have is a research-based approach. We're looking constantly at what the country needs, and we want to fund students and to do courses that lead to greater or faster national development. We need roads, we need buildings, we need electricity or power. We need to harness our natural resources using our own people. We need to find ways of preserving our foreign exchange so that we pay our own people to do things in Naira rather than pay other people to do it for us in dollars. We need to domesticate our education such that we are less dependent, not just on imports, but on foreign input, if you like. Today, we don't produce cars. So every time we buy a car, we've created a job somewhere else. However, we do produce leather. And therefore, why would we be buying bags from any other country, leather bags, other than Nigeria? So some we have to be dependent on because we need the equipment or the goods, but others we're just not. We don't need it. We just need to do the things, manufacture things we can manufacture here. We need to do them better so that the market will be more ready to take it. The local market will be more ready to take it. I'll tell you something else. So I see this sort of in several buckets. One is, what are the things that we need today that will drive growth in Nigeria? What are the skills we need today that will drive economic growth in Nigeria? The second is, what are the things that we need to be looking at today that will drive economic growth in the future? Because economic growth in the future is not necessarily the same as economic growth now. And I think the third bucket is, and I alluded to it a few minutes ago, what are the things that we can do for ourselves today that we're currently asking other people at great cost to do for us, even though we can do it ourselves if only we had the education? So those are the sort of three broad buckets that I would want to put it into. And I think I probably want to use an example for you of what I'm talking about. When I was a young boy, nobody in Nigeria, no parents, none of my parents' friends bought automatic cars because they all had manual cars, because nobody could fix an automatic gearbox on a car. And also, battery technology wasn't as good as it is today. So sometimes you'd get up in the morning, go to the car, try to start it, and it wouldn't start. The battery just didn't have enough power. So somebody would have to push the car for you. You let the clutch go, put down the throttle, and then the car goes, and it goes for the rest of the day. Today, battery development, technology, if you like, has improved. It takes a lot to run a battery down. But also, how many people buy manual cars today? Very few. Because sometime between the time I described and today, an army of people now can fix cars that are automatic. What's my point? At the time that people were buying manual cars, nobody saw the future of electric cars. And I can go on and on and on, even electric windows were a very novel thing. Today, you can't buy a car with a winder. So what does the future look like? Is it electric cars? Or is it petrol cars? Is it gas-fired? We need to train people today for the emerging technologies, the emerging development of tomorrow. I think the other thing that we need to recognize is that in order for us to create jobs, we have to regulate the working environment. If you walk into a pharmacy in Nigeria today, thanks to NAFDAC, there must be a pharmacist on site. But if you want to sell petrol, if you own a petrol station and you want to sell petrol from your petrol station, you can take anybody off the road, put a nozzle in one hand, a POS in another, and they're selling petrol all day long. They've had no safety training. They've had no training around health and safety and the rest of it all. And there's no status attached to blue-collar jobs. We need to start training people, giving them certificates so they can earn more money, so they can have more people on standby. If you wanted to go in an airplane today, you need to have 2 pilots. Only one's going to fly the plane, not 2. But there's a recognition that you need 2 for safety. So if one goes down, the other one's there. We need to start looking at many industries here where people are just cutting corners, taking risks, and making huge profit at the top, but not creating very many meaningful jobs at the bottom. So we give loans, and our job may not be to create jobs, but eventually the people we're giving loans to will come back to us and say, "You gave me a loan. Where's the job?" So we have to think about these things, to start being very intelligent and stop thinking in, this is my job, I'm just going to do it. What's the impact? What are the ramifications of what you're doing? So this is where, this is the answer to, I hope, the answer to the question that you just asked me.
You've said it all. You've said it all. You've said it all. I mean, taking the safety conversation further, by the time we do more of these, so many of the hazards that we had towards the end of last year, where there were several deaths in different states of the country because people were just, being brought together to get some goodies. So people will be able to know better with regards, the HSE skill sets that is required before people are gathered in a place to come and get their goodies, like that, especially children, that lost their lives. So you've got a very good point, So it's good to see that, what NELFUND is doing is going to go beyond just putting money in people's hands to go to school, but of course, going into the future, helping them become better citizens and helping the country to become a better place as well. Just a top-up question, okay, which I think is very crucial and very key. This is in terms of, because in everything, equality and equity actually is very important. And I'm sure that people have actually sounded this by you or by your team in the past since you started giving out these loans, So in terms of addressing equity issues to ensure inclusivity for marginalized and underserved groups of people, including women, rural communities, persons with disabilities, people of particular tribe and background or political background or whatever. How is NELFUND addressing this to ensure that equity and inclusivity is really considered and ensuring that everybody, regardless of their background, are able to benefit? Just the last top-up questions, like I would say.
Thank you. It's an important question. And the reason it's an important question is because NELFUND is a government entity funded by Nigerians. The physical funding comes from taxpayers, but actually, if you're a member of Club Nigeria, you are a stakeholder, a shareholder in the funds that we are trusted to give out. Whether you're a woman, a man, a person with a disability, somebody from a very poor background, somebody from a particular geography. This is an equal opportunities, or it should be an equal opportunities platform. There's certainly some of it we've eliminated by having this as an online application process. So having it as an online application process, it automatically cannot leave women out. It automatically cannot leave men out. It automatically cannot leave out people who are poor. However, it creates new challenges for people with disabilities. Because if a person is blind, how do they apply for something online? We're looking very closely at that, and we're working with the National Association for People with Disabilities. I talked about the foundation earlier, I think, NELFUND Foundation we're looking at, because we can't be lending money to people who have physical disabilities. I'll give you an example. If a person is blind and they're at university, they have to travel to that university or polytechnic every day, they usually need somebody to help them get there. If they're going with that person, they have to pay for the transport for both of them. So their cost base is already double the person who isn't blind. So, we need to find ways of mitigating and equalizing the opportunity for everybody. Like I said, the fact that it's an online platform takes out gender-based disability. Hopefully it takes it out completely, because we don't do any screening in that regard. It takes out the state of origin or local government of origin based discrimination. But it doesn't necessarily work for people with disabilities. I'll tell you the other thing. People go to schools in Nigeria that have no lifts, no ramps. So if a person is in a wheelchair, they're automatically discriminated against because of the physicality of the environment where they're going. And we're funding them. So if we're giving 20,000 a month and they're spending 10,000 on a guide, then we're only giving them 10,000. Okay. So we're looking at these things very closely. We welcome ideas. We welcome ways of, the experience of disabled people in Nigeria is different to the experience of disabled people in Senegal, in Rwanda, in the UK, in America. So we have to find our own local solution to some of these things. And so it's not off the top of the hat. Okay, just go and get a sign language expert. That's not what it's about here. There's very little support that people with disabilities get here. And we're not set up to provide that support. But we are set up to provide equal opportunities, and we must play our part.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much for all of the responses you've provided. Thank you so much for everything that you've said and everything that we have learned today. And we believe strongly that, millions of others out there will basically be learning from this as well. And I also think that it's even more about the insights that have come from your responses, because they're going to trigger people to put on their thinking caps and be able to see how they can contribute to the system in future. So as we wrap this up now, I will just have Dakpo to come back. Hi, Dapo, are you there?
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Zoya. We really appreciate it. And I would like to also congratulate you as well, briefly, because like I mentioned, we have actually centered on you as being our man of the year for our magazine, because of the great things that NELFUND is doing. Like I mentioned to you some time ago, one of the things that really drives EduTimes Africa is that we're trying to see whatever we could do to reduce the out of school numbers in Nigeria, which everybody knows are astronomically high. And NELFUND has done a wonderful, enormous job regarding that. And you can't think of an organization or a leader who deserves that accolade more than you do. So I'd like to say big thank you for what you're doing, and congratulations as well. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much for having me on your program, your show, your magazine. It's been a great experience. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
I love the piece of art you've got behind you, by the way. Very nice artwork.
Thank you. It's not me. I wish I could take the credit, but thank you anyway.
Thank you so much.
God bless you, sir.
All right, thank you, sir.
All right,
enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks.